Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. President Trump makes announcements on cartels and human trafficking at the White House. We bring it to you live. Two historic illegal gambling schemes involving NBA stars and millions of dollars in proceeds. Justice Department announces charges against Portland Trail Blazer Chauncey Billups and Miami Heat's Terry Rozier. President Donald Trump calls off a surge of federal agents to San Francisco. San Francisco's mayor said he had spoken to Trump about the city's progress against crime. Western allies are increasing pressure on Russia. Both the U.S. and the European Union announced further sanctions on Moscow. How the Kremlin is responding. U.S. sanctions on Russian oil appear to be effective. Two of its most top importers are said to be pulling back their purchases. The numbers of children in New York City public schools dealing with homelessness has been increasing for the past 10 years. NTD looks into some of the causes and possible solutions for this growing problem.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Thank you for staying with us. On day 23 of the shutdown, the White House is urging Senate Democrats to approve the continuing resolution and reopen the government. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says the shutdown will significantly impact air travel.
Let us be very clear from the White House today. If the Democrats continue to keep the government closed, we fear there will be significant flight delays, disruptions, and cancellations in major airports across the country this holiday season. If Democrats continue to shut down the government, they will also be shutting down American air travel.
The White House said airline associations are sounding the alarm, saying their air traffic controllers are operating under immense pressure and resources are stretched thin. The White House noted that SNAP food stamps are beginning to lapse this week in some states. If the shutdown continues, there will not be enough funds to provide SNAP benefits for more than 40 million Americans on November 1st. Leavitt also explained why President Trump imposed sanctions on two Russian oil companies.
The president has always maintained that he would implement sanctions on Russia when he felt it was appropriate and necessary. And yesterday was that day. I think the president has also long expressed his frustration with Vladimir Putin and, frankly, both sides of this war. And he's always said in order to negotiate a good peace deal, both sides need to be interested in a good peace deal. And he feels as though, unfortunately, from the Russian side as of late, he has not seen enough interest and enough action in terms of moving the ball forward towards peace. And so a meeting between these two leaders is not completely off the table. I think the president and the entire administration hopes that one day that can happen again. But we want to make sure that there's a tangible, positive outcome out of that meeting.
Leavitt said Trump wants to make sure a potential meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin will be a good use of his time. She also noted that the president has grown increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress from both sides of this war. President Trump will be departing for Asia tomorrow. He will arrive in Malaysia this weekend and is going to meet with the country's prime minister as well as ASEAN leaders. He will then head to Japan and South Korea by Tuesday to meet their leaders. Trump will also meet with Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the APEC summit in South Korea next Thursday. Now, a Senate bill to pay military members and other essential federal employees during the government shutdown has failed. Senators voted today on the Shutdown Fairness Act. It would have paid active duty service members and federal employees who are accepted or performing emergency work during the shutdown. This would have included the Capitol Police, air traffic controllers, park rangers, ICE and Border Patrol agents, and more. The bill was sponsored by Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. Lawmakers mostly voted along party lines, with Democrats blocking the bill in a vote of 54 to 45. It needed 60 yes votes to pass. 3 Democratic senators voted in favor of the measure: Senators Jon Ossoff, Raphael Warnock, and John Fetterman. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin has declared a state of emergency to provide hunger relief for his state. His declaration comes as Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits run out on November 1st. Youngkin said the move was in response to the government shutdown, which he blamed on Democrats. The Republican governor added that he believed Democrats were using hungry Virginians as leverage in negotiations. Youngkin said, quote, "This is an extraordinary action and is only necessary because of the shamelessness of congressional Democrats." Youngkin called on Virginia's Democrat senators Mark Warner and Tim Kaine to vote to pass a continuing resolution to open the government. The governor added, quote, "The Commonwealth will provide food benefits until congressional Democrats put the interests of Virginians in need ahead of their politics." The government shutdown could soon impact American women and children. A nonprofit group is warning that millions of people enrolled in the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, or WIC, may not receive food aid in November. The National WIC Association says that millions of U.S. families could have their access to the WIC program cut off as early as November 1st. That's unless the federal government provides emergency relief. The WIC Association describes the program as a lifeline for nearly 7 million pregnant and postpartum women, infants, and young children. SNAP benefits are also at risk. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin just declared a state of emergency to allow the state to cover any shortfall until the federal government reopens. Multiple states have warned that SNAP benefits could run out starting on November 1st if the shutdown persists. Some states have said that the lapse in funding has forced officials to delay payments approved on or after October 16th. Joining us now to discuss this is Hadley Manning, Senior Fellow for Culture and Family at Independent Women and a Blankley Fellow at the Steamboat Institute. And we have George Carrillo, the former Democratic candidate for governor of Oregon and former director of social determinants of health for Oregon. So good afternoon. Thank you both for joining us today. Hadley, start us off here with WIC. What exactly do American families on the program receive, and what could they face if they don't receive this aid?
Sure. WIC is a program that's intended to provide nutritional assistance to pregnant women, to nursing women, to postpartum women, and to their infant children and young children. This is a program that is funded by the federal government, administered by states. I believe that Governor Youngkin's doing the right thing here by making sure that vulnerable Virginian women and children who rely on this program aren't being held hostage to the debate that's taking place in Washington, D.C. over the budget. But it is a critical program. It's one that provides infant formula, baby food, and other supports to women and children.
Okay, George, now to you. Are you concerned about this situation? How concerned are you? Should the families be worried?
I am concerned with the situation because it's going to affect about 40 million Americans. We know that the SNAP benefit program is a proven method. It definitely provides a better quality of life for individuals, especially for our children. It lowers their obesity levels. It provides them with the cognitive function that they need in order to be productive members of society. It shows that it increases their grades. It's a major concern. I think right now, for me, the additional concern is that this is continuing to last, this government shutdown. We really need to get both Democrats and Republicans to start speaking and coming up with a solution, a temporary solution for these subsidies, so that way we can open up the government, but one side has to start compromising with the other.
Okay, Hadley, what do you think about the situation? How do we get Democrats and Republicans working together to try to reopen the government so that the American people at the end of the day are not suffering because of politics?
You know, I'm fully aware that on a TV program, we're supposed to resort to our partisan corners, and I'm supposed to call this the Schumer shutdown, and I'm supposed to blame Democrats, but I'm going to go with a different take here, and I'm going to zoom out to a 30,000-foot view. The American people are very divided, and that is reflected in Congress. That's one reason why we don't see a lot of legislation getting passed through the traditional method of getting supermajorities in both houses and getting bills to the president's desk. Instead, this puts enormous pressure on our budgeting process, because with a simple majority, by passing a budget, both sides have been guilty in the past of trying to get their policy priorities through. Right now, it just so happens that Democrats are the team that want to keep subsidies in place that were intentionally originally passed as temporary enhanced subsidies during the COVID pandemic to increase the amount that taxpayers are covering on the premiums for people who buy their insurance through the Affordable Care Act marketplaces. If we pass a clean CR at this time, that simply means that those subsidies don't continue. It changes the premium payment for people who have, for example, 400% of the federal poverty level or more. But there are other policy priorities like WIC, like SNAP, that Republicans and Democrats have long agreed should get funding, and there's no changes to those programs here. So, in order for those programs and our military members and other federal employees to continue to get paid, for our government to begin functioning again, that's where the tension is. We have to resolve whether we want to see our budgeting process become one where we debate policy priorities like these subsidies for ACA consumers, or whether we want to go ahead and pass a clean budget and have that debate separate from the budget process. Now, I realize this means it's going to make it very difficult for Democrats to keep those subsidies in place. They're using the leverage that they have right now during the budgeting process to try to keep those subsidies in place. But they're unfortunately putting the rest of America in a position where other programs that aren't up for debate are now facing problems and budget shortfalls as a result.
Okay, so George, you heard what Hadley said. What is your point of view on that?
So I believe that this is where Republicans need to negotiate with Democrats. When we think about the subsidies, the Affordable Care Act more than doubled when these subsidies were put into place, and it's working. We're being able to provide affordable accessibility to healthcare, which produces better outcomes. And so right now, without some sort of plan, what I'm waiting for is Republicans to come up and say, look, we have a plan. We were proposing this plan during this time of shutdown, but they haven't proposed anything. They just want Democrats to sign off on the current bill the way it is. The subsidies will go away, and hoping that we're going to be able to negotiate something for a longer term. My position on this is, let's take the politics out of it. Let's provide some temporary subsidies right now, so that way we can actually have a debate on what does the Affordable Care Act, how does that continue to be funded? How do we allow for accessibility to healthcare to be affordable? But we're not getting anywhere right now. The House is not in session. The Senate is not moving, in either direction. There is really no negotiations happening. It's sort of this tactics of who's going to blink first. And the casualties of this will be the American people, and both parties are going to suffer the consequences for their actions.
So Hadley, you can respond if you want to, but I want to ask you, are there some alternatives or anything else for states or families should the federal government not provide emergency relief as this shutdown continues?
With regard to other programs like WIC, like SNAP, I've seen governors like Governor Jared Polis in Colorado and Governor Glenn Youngkin in Virginia taking steps right now to make sure that states can cover any shortfalls for programs that are absolutely critical, like SNAP, like WIC. However, when it comes to the subsidies in the Affordable Care Act, which really are at the center of the debate in Washington, D.C. right now, there are some states that provide various other means for people to become insured. However, the biggest problem that Democrats face is that the Affordable Care Act made health insurance so expensive that in order for most people to be able to afford it, they need huge amounts of subsidies from taxpayers. When we talk about the enhanced subsidies that were passed during the COVID pandemic, this is just in addition to subsidies that had already been in existence on the books for people below a certain FPL, federal poverty level. So the biggest problem at the center of our healthcare debate right now is just how expensive the Affordable Care Act has made health insurance. And the solution that Democrats have come up with over time is the original subsidies in the ACA and additional enhanced subsidies. And if that's the direction that you want to go, if you want to keep pouring taxpayer subsidies into a fire, fueling an increasing fire in our healthcare system, we're just going to see costs continue to accelerate. And that affects Americans of all income levels, but it particularly affects those in the middle class who aren't eligible for Medicaid or other government supports, and they're having to go out and buy this very expensive health insurance on their own. So this is a problem created by the Affordable Care Act, owned completely by Democrats. It is not one that Republicans have had a chance to resolve, and it's not one that I think we should be using the budget process to resolve. If I agree with one thing that George said, it's let's take the politics out of it. And from my perspective, that means passing a clean CR, passing a clean budget, and having the debate about healthcare policy separate from the debate about whether our government should be open or not.
So, George, I think at the end of the day, it's about putting Americans first. So, if we keep that in mind, what do you think is the long-term solution here?
Well, the long-term solution is we really need to be able to stabilize the Affordable Health Care Act. For years, Republicans have been trying to weaken that program. We need to also look at how do we have these bipartisan conversations? How do we come to a solution? How do we, reunite the American people, especially around the programs? All of our tax dollars are there to support our government, our way of life, and how we help out people that cannot currently afford like food and programs like the WIC benefit, accessibility to healthcare, accessibility to shelter, and financial security. These are all things that tax dollars go into that provide the quality of life that the American people know and love. But right now, we're letting our politics in the way of things. When Democrats put something forward, Republicans try to repeal it, and it's the same thing from the opposite side. We really need to start looking at what's not in the best interest of the party, but what's in the best interest of the people. And that's where our tax dollars should be going. That's where these conversations should be leading us to, because at the end of the day, we need to be able to provide a better quality of life for the American people, because this is our government.
So, Hadley, I want to ask you the same question here. What is the long-term solution with, tens of millions of Americans dependent on these benefits and programs like SNAP and WIC?
Right. Well, I think at the heart of the debate that we're seeing over this budget, and more broadly speaking in our politics, is a question: do we want our safety net programs to target people who are truly in need, who are facing dire poverty, who can't afford food and shelter and healthcare and basic needs? Or do we want the government to be about funding these things for everybody? I mean, these enhanced premium subsidies that we're talking about were aimed at people in the middle class. They aren't aimed at people who are at the very bottom of the income ladder, and they aren't aimed at people who are eligible for Medicaid, which is the program that is intended to help people who otherwise truly can't afford health care. Initially, Medicaid was a program for pregnant women, for single parents, for people who were disabled and who couldn't go out and work and afford their own health care. So the question before Americans and the question before Congress is, do we want to be a country that provides a safety net, a true safety net for people who really have a need? Or do we want the government to be about providing every need for every person? And that's why Republicans, that's why conservatives have been trying to push back against the growth in these programs, because not only does it change our safety net into more of a hammock, but it also ultimately harms the people for whom these programs were designed in the first place. And so the expansion of these programs is something that ultimately somebody has to stand against, not just because we're trying to protect taxpayers or save money, but because we're ultimately trying to protect people for whom the safety net programs were designed in the first place.
Okay, George, I just want to ask you one last question here. What advice would you give regular Americans, to talk to their local lawmakers about this situation? What message should regular Americans send to them?
I believe that they need to start communicating with their lawmakers, especially Republicans, and saying, you know what, you need to come back into session, especially in the House. We need to start having conversations of how do we open up the government again? How do we keep the healthcare incentives in place as a temporary solution for us to be able to come up with a permanent, more long-term sustainable plan for the Affordable Care Act? We have to also let lawmakers know that these programs do help. Programs like SNAP and WIC, southern states really are affected by what will happen after November 1. They need to start speaking up, because this is not about being a red state or a blue state with these programs. These programs do work. We need to fund them. We need to ensure that we're not letting politics come in the middle of saving lives, because this is what these programs do. They save American lives, and that's what we need to continue to focus on, and that's what the messaging needs to be to these politicians, to get their act together and open up the government.
Well, all right. I think it was a good discussion today. Hadley, George, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
President Trump says he's withholding a planned surge of federal agents into San Francisco after speaking with the mayor. San Francisco Mayor Daniel Lurie confirmed he had spoken with Trump and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Customs and Border Protection agents had already begun arriving to support federal immigration enforcement efforts. Protesters were gathering outside a Coast Guard base where they were located. Lori posted on X that he told Trump last night that San Francisco was making progress in combating crime. The mayor said, quote, visitors are coming back, buildings are getting leased and purchased, and workers are coming back to office. Trump posted on Truth Social, quote, I spoke to Mayor Lori last night, and he asked very nicely that I give him a chance to see if he can turn it around. New York's Attorney General is asking the public to send photos, videos, and other evidence of federal immigration raids for review. The appeal comes just one day after an ICE operation targeting street vendors in Manhattan's Chinatown erupted into chaos as protesters clashed with federal agents. Letitia James said every new New Yorker has the right to live without fear or intimidation, but the Department of Homeland Security called her request an obstruction of justice. The comments follow Tuesday's immigration enforcement operation on Canal Street, a stretch of Manhattan known for its street vendors and counterfeit goods. Federal officials say 14 people were arrested, including illegal immigrants from Mali, Senegal, and Guinea, some with prior criminal records. 4 people were arrested for allegedly assaulting law enforcement and another for obstruction. DHS says several of those taken into custody had previous charges ranging from robbery and domestic violence to counterfeiting and drug offenses. The number of children in New York City public schools dealing with homelessness is reaching a record high. The problem was even brought up during the New York City mayoral debate. NTD Sean Marshall has more details on the issue.
The number of homeless children in public schools in New York City has been rising. That's according to a report released by the Advocates for Children of New York.
This is the 10th year in a row where there has been over 100,000 students identified as homeless.
But in 2024 to 2025, while overall enrollment numbers declined, the number of homeless or displaced public school student cases rose above 150,000 for the first time ever. What could be contributing to these alarming numbers? And are there fixes to some of the issues that are not being implemented?
Based on what we hear from families directly, as well as data from the Department of Homeless Services, that the lack of affordable housing, fleeing domestic violence are both 2 of the top reasons why families give that they are seeking emergency shelter.
Jennifer Pringle, the project director at Advocates for Children of New York, is able to put some reasoning behind what's going on.
As if we want to break the cycle of family homelessness, we have to make sure that students get the support they need in school so that they can be successful and graduate and go on and live full independent lives and never return to homelessness. Students who don't get a high school diploma are 4.5 times more likely to experience homelessness as young adults.
Pringle also mentioned another study on New York data. It found that students in shelters who don't graduate from high school are more than 2 times more likely to experience homelessness again as adults. The homelessness problem was a topic for the second debate for New York City Mayor. The outdated transportation system for displaced children was mentioned.
Right now we have school bus contracts that are over 45 years old, that do not meet the needs of today's students, which means that students in temporary housing oftentimes have ridiculously long commutes to get to school. This should not be happening. The city should rebid the contracts, get new contracts in place that better serve today's students and especially students in temporary housing. Second thing, the state also plays a role in this. Right now, school districts do not get any additional funding to meet the educational needs of students in temporary housing. This should change.
The overall rate of student homelessness rose in every borough relative to 2023 to 2024 and was once again the highest in the Bronx, followed by Manhattan. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
The Treasury Department says the nation's budget deficit from April through September was the lowest in 6 years, totaling $468 billion, down nearly 40% from a year ago. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent credits stronger revenues and tighter federal spending, calling it proof the administration's fiscal policies are working. This comes soon after the Treasury Department reported that the government posted a budget surplus of $198 billion in September, the largest of any surplus in September on record. But the good news comes alongside a sobering milestone. The nation's debt has now topped $38 trillion, just 2 months after crossing $37 trillion. Besson says the White House remains focused on lowering interest rates and bringing the deficit to GDP ratio down to 3% within the next few years. It could be time for would-be home buyers to get new keys as they gain some leverage in the real estate market. Mortgage rates have dipped to their lowest level in more than a year. Freddie Mac reported that the 30-year fixed mortgage rate is now at 6.19%. This comes as home prices are softening across major metro areas. Redfin shared that the typical home sold for 1.4% below asking price last month. This is the biggest September discount since before the pandemic-era price surge. Another report from the National Association of Realtors revealed that September sales of existing homes rose by the fastest pace in 7 months. Global oil prices rose sharply today. The jump comes as traders worry about a squeeze on global supply after the U.S. imposed sanctions on 2 Russian oil companies. Here's more.
Oil prices surged almost 5% early Thursday. Markets reacted after the US put sanctions on leading Russian suppliers Rosneft and Lukoil over the Ukraine war. One analyst said the sanctions mean refineries in China and India will need to find other suppliers for oil, or they risk exclusion from the Western banking system. Both countries are major buyers of Russian oil. The US said it was prepared to take further action as it called on Moscow to agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine. Britain sanctioned Rosneft and Lukoil last week. EU countries have approved a 19th package of sanctions against Russia, which includes a ban on imports of the country's LNG. Brent and West Texas Intermediate futures rose by more than $2 a barrel after the sanctions were announced. Analysts argue the impact of sanctions on oil markets will depend on how India reacts and if Russia finds alternative buyers. India became the largest buyer of discounted seaborne Russian crude after Moscow began its war in Ukraine.
The U.S. oil sanctions on Russian oil are putting pressure on its top importers. The U.S. has imposed sanctions on 2 of Moscow's biggest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. Multiple sources told Reuters that Chinese state oil companies have suspended purchases of seaborne Russian oil, at least for the short term, due to concerns over sanctions. The sources said this includes PetroChina, Sinopec, CNOOC, and Zhenhua Oil. Also, to comply with U.S. sanctions, India, the largest buyer of seaborne Russian oil, is set to sharply cut crude imports from Moscow. This sharp drop in oil demand will put a strain on Moscow's oil revenues and push up global prices for non-sanctioned oil. President Trump is pardoning convicted Binance founder Changpeng Zhao. That's according to the White House, which says the previous administration prosecuted Zhao in a war on cryptocurrency. Zhao had to step down as the chief of Binance when the company agreed to settle with the U.S. government worth more than $4 billion. Prosecutors agreed to end a years-long probe into misconduct at the world's largest crypto exchange. Trump's pardon paves the way for Zhao to return to the business he helped found in 2017. He has already served his time in prison after a judge sentenced him to 4 months.